Welcome everyone to tonight's episode of the MCSS Mixtape, bringing civics into early elementary. I'm your host, Dave Johnson. I'm the current president of MCSS, and I'm the chair of the Online Learning Committee. I'll do a little bit more in the way of a welcome in just a second, but I wanted to go over some quick ground rules for tonight and give a few quick announcements. If you are attending this for sketch credit, I will send out a form after the session has concluded, probably tomorrow. It'll be the same email where we send out the recap. So look for a link to click in there. And you'll have about a week to get the form back to our awesome office manager, Mandy, by emailing it to info@mcssmi.org. And that'll all be in the email. So don't worry if you missed that and didn't get that written down. But be on the lookout, like I said, probably tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then Wednesday. This is one of several sessions on the mixtape, and we've got 3 mixtape tracks to lay this week. So we hope you'll consider attending some of those as well. And our next offering will actually be on Wednesday night. It's Hands-On Geography for a World of 8 Billion. And that's being hosted by, I will cut this part out because I cannot remember offhand who that one is hosted by. So there we go. Please note the time for that session is 5 to 6 o'clock, just like this one. Our spring conference this year, which will hopefully help lead us to volume 2 of the MCSS Mixtape, will take place May 3rd and 4th at Macomb ISD in Southeast Michigan. If you've got a lesson, a strategy, or a topic that you're dying to share with others, our call for proposals is now open. Who knows, you might just end up on volume 2 of the MCSS Mixtape next fall. And finally, we offer a lot of great programming, like this webinar series, for free, regardless of whether you're a member or not. But there are a lot of great benefits to being an MCSS member. You get discounted rates to the MCSS conference. You get some member-specific publications, like the Great Lakes Social Studies Journal. And of course, advocacy. Your $40 a year goes a long way towards advancing social studies education across the state. And if you are already a member, consider renewing early and locking things in for another year. And if you're not a member yet, there's no better time than the present to join. And with that, it's time to get started. Tonight we have Dr. Bridget Bobian, a professor from the College of Education at Eastern Michigan University, and she teaches elementary social studies methods courses. Her research has focused on the history of education. She's received many awards since coming to Eastern Michigan, including EMU's most prestigious honor, the Ronald W. Collins Distinguished Faculty Teaching Award. She was also the College Educator of the Year for the Michigan Council for Social Studies and a fellow of the R. Freeman Butts Institute on Civic Learning and Teacher Education. Dr. Bobian's research has been published in journals such as Young Children and the Journal of Research of Childhood Education. She's presented at over 50 national conferences. She was also a teacher in Detroit Public Schools and an administrator in several districts prior to coming to Eastern Michigan University. In January of 2023, she was named the founding director for the Upshur Institute for Civic Education. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I mute myself so that we can hear from the fantastic Dr. Bobian. Dr. Bobian, take it away. It's all you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thanks. I appreciate that. Thank you for joining us, everyone, for being here this evening. Let me get my screen up for a second. And I gotta get over here. Thanks for being patient as I get that up. So, as Dave said, this is bringing civic education into early elementary school. It was a workshop that I did back in April for MCSS's conference. And then again, I was asked to do it in October, and I'm really thrilled to be able to do that. So thank you so much. And I just want to make sure as I keep going that all you can see is my presentation screen, right?
Yes. You are good. Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right. So I want to give you a little bit about a history about myself, just so you can kind of see where I'm coming from. I earned my teaching degree from Eastern Michigan University in elementary and early childhood education. I was a Detroit public school teacher for many years, bouncing back and forth between kindergarten and preschool and 4th grade social studies at the time. And then I became a social studies methods professor at the University of Detroit Mercy, and then went back into Detroit Public Schools to become a fourth grade teacher again, and then a kindergarten teacher before I joined Eastern. At Eastern, I was the director of the early childhood education program, and I was taught the social studies methods courses. And in January, the university received a large endowment to create the Upshur Institute for Civic Education, and I was named the founding director. So I'm kind of thrilled about that, to say the least. What I want to talk to you about today is obviously what civics should look like in early childhood. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I have a very clear definition of what I'm kind of viewing as citizenship. So I don't view citizenship in the capital C kind of way. The capital C citizenship is this kind of citizenship that is focused on the legal definition and is often limited to very patriotic thoughts and obedience, and there's a certain specific way to be a citizen. I don't view citizenship like that at all. I view citizenship with a small c. And that means that anyone who lives or resides within a community is a citizen of that community. So citizenship is actually all inclusive, not exclusive. So I think that that's really important to define that, because the first definition with the capital C really leaves children out of that definition. Where here with the small c, it's inclusive of everyone. So the moment you're born until the moment you pass away, you are citizens of that community. And I think that that's a really important distinction. So I want to give you a definition of civics, because that's not something that we're all naturally familiar with. So if you can just take a minute and read that for a second. So it's a social science dealing with everything that goes around citizenship. And unfortunately, in most school districts, civics ranks as the #1 most hated course. And I find that absolutely appalling because, like, I immediately think of a math course, which is definitely my bias. Excuse me for that one. But civics should be how we are with each other, how we talk with one another, how we communicate with one another, how we are in public space. I am really concerned and very frustrated that that's kind of the reputation that civics has. So let me see if I can, oh, it's not letting me move forward. There we go. And then in early childhood, the National Council for Social Studies actually has a really clear position statement on early childhood that they actually did in conjunction with the National Association for the Education of Young Children, or NAEYC. And MCSS is saying that early childhood is a time when the foundations of social studies are established and should be explicitly attended to engaging and developing young children's capacity for citizenship, democratic, or civic activity. And I think, and this is what a lot of my research is about, and it's also what drove me to do this presentation back in April, both in and Michigan Council for Social Studies and at the Michigan Council for Early Childhood, because I think we are wasting time not talking about civics and engaging students in civic content substantially earlier and more often and consistently every single day, on and on and on. Being so grounded in early childhood and having been the graduate coordinator, I know what early childhood can expose children to and the resources that it provides them. And that we're not doing that in any way around civics is really concerning. So I want to stop for a second and do a brief activity, if you don't mind, and I'm going to ask you to participate here. So I need you to just take a scrap sheet of paper. And down the center, you're going to make one line, and across the top, you're going to make a line and then divide the top section into two. And on the left, you're going to write unconscious, and on the right, you're going to write conscious. Okay. And what I want you to do for a few minutes is I want you to turn the paper actually sideways so that it looks like a timeline. And as far to the left as you can go on the timeline is what your youngest, earliest memories of civic development would be. And the far, far right would be you now, where you are right now in your civic development. The top, the conscious, would be anything that you clearly remember developing some sort of civic identity in yourself. And the unconscious would be things that you don't consciously think about. All right, so I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. I'm actually going to set my timer, and then we're going to we'll talk about it for a few minutes. So let me kind of give you an overview of mine, and then I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to share. I've obviously put a little thought into mine, more than 2 minutes that I gave you guys to do. And it's developed. I like to do this activity. I do it fairly often. And one of the things I found is every single time I do it, I hear from others and I get more ideas to develop my own timeline. Like there's some things I have on note paper over here that I still need to add from the last time that I did this. So I was really fortunate to live in a family where history was really important. And one of the things that I have found is that children who are raised in a family that focuses and values history also tend to value civics. There's a real natural connection there, which is a whole nother presentation. But I grew up in a family that loved history. All of my grandparents, my parents, my mom worked at Greenfield Village throughout my childhood as a librarian and an archivist. She then went on to work at Colonial Williamsburg. They were all engaged in politics. My grandfathers were both incredibly involved in the automotive unions. There's a picture of my grandfather in the 1940s on the picket line with a sign that said, "Henry and his goons must go." So this is a long time conversation in my family. And so it really helped kind of transfer a civic identity to me, both consciously and unconsciously. And so I'm curious what transferred to you consciously from your parents and your family, and what transferred to you unconsciously. Jennifer, would you be willing to share anything?
Sure. So consciously, I remember like as a kid, the Ronald Reagan, George Bush campaign, just running for election. I remember like George Bush, when he was vice president for Reagan, he like came to Michigan, and I think like I was at a Christmas parade, so I remember that. Talking about voting in 5th grade. I remember 12th grade was government in high school. College, I went to Eastern Michigan and had to take the Political Science 101 class as an undergrad. And then unconscious, a little bit like I can relate to like the Catholic school and church, because I went to a Catholic school. And then I wrote down JFK conspiracy documentaries that, like as I've gotten older, like watching those on TV.
Yeah, and I just, for clarification, when I say Indian video for trash,
Mm-hmm.
Indian is in fact that is what they capitalized on in the commercial, which is why I use that language. I understand that it's not necessarily, but yeah, it sounds like we have some similar experiences there. Dave, what about you?
Well, I was chuckling at your 5 years old voting booth with parents because I remember that clearly myself as well. Watching my mom vote, I didn't really know what I was doing in there, but it was. I know now what I was doing in there, but back in those days, I was like, okay, we're in this weird little thing, and mom's bubbling. I don't quite get it. Or actually, I think it was poking at the time, if I recall correctly. So. I remember consciously, I remember Reagan being shot, and I remember making a connection like, did you vote for him or did you vote for the other guy? Like, I was trying to get a sense of how she felt about that situation by asking her who she voted for, because it wasn't much, I wasn't much older than, I don't remember exactly which came first. I just remember that conversation. I remember middle school mock election. We were all in the auditorium and we had this big like rally sort of thing. I remember my high school government class. I remember voting myself, and then I started teaching, and now I take my own daughters into the voting booth with me and try to explain to them what I'm doing. I remember unconsciously thinking while I was in the voting booth, what is voting? Like, what is this? What am I doing here anyway? We had US history courses, and that's unconscious because we talked about foundations, but we didn't really hammer home like civic education and that. It was more of a history course, and that's as far as I got. Unconscious was a lot harder than conscious.
Okay, yeah. Unconscious is taking me quite some time. Thank you both for sharing. So I think, it clearly shows in just 2 minutes. Look at all the things that you were each able to kind of put on your timeline. And again, it loops back to what I said before we did this activity. We are wasting really important weeks, days, months of children's lives not discussing these really basic topics around citizenship and civics. And when you think about it, we're doing the work. Jennifer, as a kindergarten teacher, you probably can very clearly vouch for this. You do a lot of what you need to act like in common space, public space. It's basically what we're doing in preschool and kindergarten and first little bit of first grade. First grade's also a lot of literacy, but all of this really important stuff is being it's slipped away because we're not necessarily talking about it. And we need to in more explicit ways. And it's really important. So let me kind of explain in detail, and both of you may be very aware of why this is actually really important. We know that there's been a tremendous reduction of class time devoted to civics elementary. In the 1960s, there was actually 4 mandatory courses. Now there's only 1 mandatory course, and often it's really about memorization and not exploring democracy beyond voting. Our federal government does a horrendous job of educating its citizens around civics. The federal government spends $50 per year per student on STEM education, while only spending 5 cents per year per student on civics education. And that is not a misprint. That is an actual fact, which is absolutely terrifying. We also know that the quality of educational opportunities varies greatly and has created a civic empowerment gap between students of color and citizens from low-income communities compared to white, middle-class, and wealthier students. So we're teaching some students who come from families with means and community with means that citizenship is something that they actively engage in, where we're teaching other students that really citizenship is about memorizing these basic traditional facts. And it's almost something that's done to you. It's not something that's actually something you participate in beyond the voting booth. The voting booth is pretty much it. Atwell paints a really bleak picture. This is the group, this is Peter Levin and Kay Kawashima Ginsburg out of Tufts. They paint a very bleak picture of working class communities, specifically dubbing them civic deserts because of this scenario. And we know that when civics education is missing, students lack the tools to critically analyze when facts are facts, and their ability to address their societal problems is significantly reduced. And I think everyone, regardless of what side of the political spectrum that they are on, can address that this is a concern that we have as a nation at this moment. So we have some really traditional views right now going on about what social studies looks like. We tend to view as a society, as elementary school teachers specifically, that children will be citizens one day, that they're not citizens right now. And my definition is completely counterintuitive to that. I believe that they're citizens and they can actively be engaged in citizenship the minute they enter public and community spaces. Contemporary view also says that we need to prepare them for becoming real citizens. We tend not to offer them these experiences in schools that recognize them as civic actors. And we presume that young children are acting as individuals not yet capable of acting on behalf or as part of their actual community. And I love this quote here. I'll give you a minute to read it. And I think we all have had a social studies teacher who has made it really all about them and what they want you to memorize from what they said from the sage on the stage approach. And it was so much about memorization. So it was teacher driven. Everything was teacher driven. Really, students had very little impact or engagement in the content or action or engaging with one another. And what we're seeing, and this is actually a side note, what we're seeing when they come to us at the university level is that they absolutely hate civics and history with a passion. So we are taking them and educating out of them the desire to be engaged in a public way within their communities. And this is a perfect quote from a student that was in one of my social studies methods courses that kind of exemplify what social studies looks like in most classrooms today. If you could take a minute and read that quote. Right? And this is not uncommon. This is what we hear in the College of Education in social studies methods. So to give you a frame of reference, by the time they get to me, they are in their very last semester before they student teach. And they've not only taken, obviously, all the required high school civics and history, but also all the university required civics and history. And then when they come to me in social studies methods, I feel like I am literally systematically dismantling years, at that point, decades of a belief system about how much they hate civics and history. And so they don't have any concept that they are going to be responsible for educating engaged citizens and actually being responsible for sustaining democracy, which is what public schools are all about, which is a whole nother presentation for a whole nother day, right? So this is really critical that we begin to introduce this in a way that makes it as interesting and as exciting as it is, not as deadly and this, right? Oh, and I've been there. I know what that feels like in that class. So for elementary schools, unfortunately, what has happened because of the testing and because of STEM topics, social studies has been relegated to the very bottom of the demands, right? Something that's completely not important. This picture here it's on my right, I would assume that it's on your right as well, was taken in a classroom. And I just, so you know, no teachers will ever be identified with this picture. I'm being respectful. And I know that that teacher is doing the absolute best that she can. And that she is probably killing at all the other topics. But in social studies, she's leaving it for 335 to 340 a day. And you know what's really going on? It's getting your coats, getting your stuff in your bag, getting cleaned up. There's no social studies going on in that course at all, that classroom at all. So we know that if there is social studies content, it's very specific knowledge. It's the memorization. It's the learning the 50 capitals. It's the whole memorization. And what this does is completely neglect how young children act with and on behalf of their communities. And it does nothing to foster their civic identity. And that's critical because at that point, that's who they are. They're learning about who their identity is and what and who they're becoming and what and who they desire to become. And that's constantly important. That's why they say all the time, look at me, look at me, look at me, because they want you to reflect back as the adults in their lives, what you are seeing, so that they can help identify who they are and what their identity is all about. And so in these early classrooms, these early elementary classrooms and preschool, we really need to foster a development of civic identity. And it's not something that's taught. Teaching is actually what got us into this situation, right? It's I'm going to go out on a limb here. Bear with me for a minute. It's the last 40 years of the football coach teaching the civics course that has probably gotten this country to where it is today. So we need to start earlier. We need to be more effective, and we need to have incredibly engaged classroom teachers doing this. And there's very specific ways it's exhibited. And And I said this earlier, but we're already doing it. So we need to do it a little bit more explicitly. So let's take a look at these. All right, this is exhibited. Civic identity and helping children develop their civic identity is exhibited when you talk about fairness and you model democratic principles in your classroom. It's when we take big principles, big ideas like federalism, for an example, and we make them developmentally appropriate so that children can learn the basic principles. It's amazing what children can understand if you break it down and make it developmentally appropriate. And instead, what we often do in education is we think, oh, well, that's an older concept. They'll get that at a later date. But we need to be breaking these big ideas down into developmentally appropriate, smaller ideas so that by the time they get to the bigger ideas, they actually already have a depth of understanding about these big philosophical principles so that they can develop their concepts and understanding of these big principles in a broader and deeper way. Civic identity and helping children develop civic identity is also there when we're asking really important questions like, how do you see yourself in this? How do you not see yourself in this? What is fair or unfair? What perspective is being heard or is valued? What are we learning from this? How can we research this? What do we believe? All of those questions can connect directly to civic identity and how you are going to operate as a child in a public space, and how that identity in a public space is then going to help you become an engaged citizen as you get older. It's also exhibited by everything we do in the classroom around classroom management. Classroom management equals good democracy skills. Although I tend to like to say this is not a democracy, it's a benevolent monarchy. But regardless, it is all about your civic identity, right? So it starts with the classroom meetings that you sit with children in those very first weeks of school, and you talk with them about how you want the classroom to run and how do they want the classroom to run. All of those classroom management discussions are really a perfect exhibit of democracy, of public space, of being a citizen with a small c. And it's how we're learning to work together to attain a sense of belonging, which is critical, civics and democracy. Again, a presentation for another day. And to develop individual responsibility, which really isn't that what we want from our citizens, is the ability to be responsible for themselves and for others in their community. Good classroom management also helps empower children to be contributing citizens and to work together. And then anything that we do around conflict resolution, peace tables, any classroom management is completely and totally about democracy and civics. And we just need to start framing it with the correct verbiage and start making the connections for the children. And then actually the children will start making those connections and taking it home with them and start talking about it with their parents. And it's kind of a rippled effect. So I'm going to let you read this quote for a minute. So I think that this is a perfect example. It makes the connections between civics and community and all of the things we do in good early childhood, all the way up to third grade, right? We are working to develop a sense of community and community responsibility, and to begin to address this hands down as a way of becoming a citizen. The connections are so easily there, and yet we're not doing it. We're not making them at this point. So if we took this approach, this community-based approach, and we start absolutely addressing it, we would recognize the shared practices that go on in early childhood classrooms to establish community. We would learn to negotiate relationships and solve interpersonal problems and see that as important to being a citizen and to how democracy should work, and sharing and caring and having concern for others. All of that is basic civic education, what we need for high quality citizens, engaged citizens, and what we need for a healthier democracy. So also these democratic life skills are skills that we teach in the early childhood and elementary classrooms that are also really critical and all about educating for a civil society. And this comes from an NAEYC book. And I think that we need to really start connecting the ideas from early childhood with the ideas for MCSS. They operate almost in complete silos, so that the research and ideas that are coming out of early childhood don't necessarily impact NCSS and vice versa. And I think that's another thing that we have to do. We need to start integrating these ideas so that these connections are commonplace. So NAEYC really wants young children to find acceptance as members of a group, learn to express emotions in ways that are non-hurting. They want them to develop a way of solving problems creatively, accepting unique human characteristics in others, and to think intelligently and ethically about what they're being confronted with. Amazing things that all go into, I mean, I really don't know skills outside of these that, these are really important skills for developing citizens and civic education. Right? Exactly. The SEL connections are all right there. Absolutely, they are. Yeah, exactly. So as we're doing this and we're starting as teachers to make really conscious, thoughtful connections, and that's what's really important, is to do this consciously and thoughtfully and intentionally, because it's all there. And it's not like I could sit down with in a kindergarten class and say, okay, class, today we're going to be talking about federalism, to use the example I used a couple slides ago. That's not going to happen, but we can talk about individual rights. There's things that we can talk about that develop along the lines of federalism that help them learn the pieces of it, even use the word, but not beat them over the head with it. It all has to be developmentally appropriate, right? But there are things that we need to watch out for. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen this book, but I love this book and I've been requiring it for my class. It's about 18 months old. It's Social Studies for a Better World. And what I really like is they talk about a lot of things that are really going on and are really important. They talk about how teachers have to be so careful today in what they say and how they respond in the classroom. They talk a lot about what's going on in Florida. It's just a really thoughtful book. And one of the things that my students are really enjoying about it is that it's coming up with concrete solutions. So it's not everyone just wringing their hands, but like, this is what we can do about it. And this is what we can do about it to help create a better world. So some of the things that they stress that we need to watch out for and not fall into the trap of in our P5 classrooms is, first, normalization of families and holidays. And I think all of us professionals are aware of this and we know this, right? Christmas isn't the standard holiday. Mom and dad and 2 kids isn't the standard holiday. That there is no normalization of what family life or community life should look like. The other is an idealization of communities and community helpers. And I know as a former early childhood person, I was really big on these are our community helpers, and this is what they're amazing at, and they're heroes. And not everyone feels that way. And to make sure that we don't idolize them, that they're humans doing amazingly brave things, but they're attainable. Their human traits are attainable. They're not, like George Washington. I can use him as a very safe example. When I was a kid, George Washington never lied. He only lied once when he cut down a cherry tree. He was this bigger than life, omnipresent, incredibly important, perfect man who led this country. Well, only as I aged and grew older, right? And I learned more, and through history classes did I realize that no, he really wasn't that. So that kind of joins the idealization and the heroification. We really need to make sure that our students see community helpers and national heroes, warts and all, that they did these amazingly good things, but they were also kind of stupid in these certain areas as well. So we need to make sure that we're showing both of those. And that's the third one, is the heroification. And then finally, we have to be really careful not to create a drama game or gamification around topics that can be very sensitive. And that's one of the things that I love about this book. If you're looking for a resource that helps you kind of look at how you can bring these ideas into your classroom in a way, in a reacting to the past kind of way, in a simulation kind of way, how to do it thoughtfully and consciously so that you're not re-traumatizing or creating trauma where there definitely doesn't need to be any. So they write really just lovely about these ideas, and I highly recommend this book. Some other really great resources are iCivics for elementary students. Everybody knows iCivics, but they have some really great resources for elementary students, not just secondary students. Kids Citizen is really good. The National Constitution Center has some really great resources. The Free Child Institute for Youth Engagement has some interesting ones, I would say, some interesting ones. Some Project Soapbox, Kid President, the Library of Congress, the National Archives, and Learning for Justice all have some great resources that you could use to kind of implement civics in your early elementary classrooms rather than just your middle school and secondary classrooms. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. What questions do you have?
I didn't have any questions, but I thought it was great, and I definitely wrote that book down you suggested, so that's one I'm going to look into.
That's a great book. There's another really good book called, let me look it up for a second, okay? It's something Civically Engaged Citizen. It was a woman who she actually came to the Institute for Civics at the state level last December.
It's the Civically Engaged Classroom. I know the book you're talking about.
Oh, it's so good. And it is by, yep. Can you see that by any chance? Am I doing this right?
Yes, I can see that. Thank you.
So it's the Civically Engaged Classroom. And I use the activities out of that book constantly in every venue.
Can confirm I did some professional development around that book a few years back, and it's super useful. The whole chapter on developing a balanced tech set alone is worth the price of the book, at least for my secondary folks in particular. But the whole thing is really approachable and really well written. I didn't have any questions. I threw a lot of my stream of consciousness thoughts as you were going through in the chat. But I just, in circling back to that piece that you were just sort of closing on there, I pulled the number 90% out of my brain, but knowing what kindergarten and first grade teachers in particular do, there's so much time and attention devoted to the rules and why do we have these rules and how do we behave during reading block, how do we do, and all of that is civics. And when you point that out to practicing teachers, then they're willing to listen to you about the other social studies as well. They're like, oh, you mean I'm already doing this? Like, hey, it's the intentionality piece of it. I just say next year when you're setting up your classroom and you're doing your rules, look at the civic standards, because those are going to help guide you towards some ways that you can do this and get more than I laughed at your slide with the 335 to 340 social studies, because in my head I was like, yep, they're getting their boots on, they're getting their coats on, they're packing up for the day. But you don't need an hour-long social studies block in K1-2. If you can find it for me, great. but find ways to free up some of that time throughout the day. And civics as part of your rules is a huge part of it. So I was really, really grateful to hear that.
It's got to be slipped into all the other, it's got to go into the nooks and crannies. You're not going to get an hour. And it's so much based on what they're already doing. One of some of the work that we're doing at Eastern that's an extension of this. So my research partner and I, who's also the social studies methods, I'm elementary social studies methods, she's secondary social studies methods, but we've become so concerned that our students are coming into our classrooms hating civics because they're coming out of classes where, you know, it's that it was exemplified by that quote of that young woman that they just had these horrendous experiences. So then they go through our program and they go back into the classroom and they don't know their responsibility around creating citizens if they're teaching in a public school. They have no confidence in their knowledge or their understanding of the content. And they themselves have never really been taught that. So these are new concepts, understanding their own civic engagement. Why it's fascinating to us because almost all of them are actively engaged, but they do not view it as citizen engagement or civic engagement. They just think it's part of who they are and what they do and what their generation does, but it's actually really embedded in these concepts. And so we're focusing a great deal at Eastern on creating a series of courses from freshman year to senior year that have the civic thread that runs all the way through it. So in our Ed 101 course, we're talking a lot about how were you taught to be a citizen? And then by the time they're done, they really understand that that's their responsibility to help us educate, engage citizenry, and that they feel confident in their skills to do that. So we're actively working on that. And we have the support of the administration at Eastern too. So I'm hoping it makes a big difference.
As you were talking, I texted my friend Ellen, who's as I say the words, you'll be like, oh yeah, Ellen, from Michigan Center for Civic Education.
That was her. She was the one. Yeah, exactly.
And I just said I didn't realize you were also on my Civics Coalition. I have been. I just haven't been able to make the meetings in about 3 months, or the last 3 meetings, which I guess is about 6 months worth. But I was just like, do you know this lady? She's got some great stuff that she's sharing right now. And she was like, yep, she's part of the same thing that you're a part of, Dave. So I need to get back to some of those meetings, definitely prioritize on my calendar. But your
I'm
work,
bummed because they're Tuesdays and Thursdays this semester, and I teach Tuesdays and Thursdays, so I can't, but I'll be able to go back in January.
well, your work is incredible. Like, this was a great session, and I'm so glad that I was able to catch it here, even though I missed it at the conference. So thank you for being willing to do it again for us, because this is great, and I think your work is going to really, really, really continue to take off, because this is important work, and I think people are starting to recognize the need for it, and here you are doing it. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It's very rare that an academic actually has a passion that they've been passionate about for decades and a window that's open. So I have good timing at the moment. Yeah, I'm feeling fortunate.
Jennifer, do you have any other questions or thoughts or anything you want to share?
No, this was great. I still communicate with some of my coworkers, so I'm going to share some of those resources with them. And that's the thing, like in kindergarten, like, yeah, trying to fit it in and, social studies, the science, like where I was at, the focus was on, like language arts, math, but it definitely needs to be more focus on like those areas of science and social studies, because they're, I feel like, just as important.
Well, and I think, Jennifer, and I'm sure you can vouch, because I sure know that when I was a preschool and kindergarten teacher, more so then than when I was a 4th grade teacher, is you don't have time. You have so little time, but you're already doing it. And that's the piece that I don't think teachers really understand, because so many of them didn't have a good experience themselves. So if we can really help teachers understand they're already doing it, I'm not adding anything else for you to do. I'm just changing how you talk about it. You're already doing it. You just need to use different language.
Mhm.
I think teachers would feel more comfortable with it.
Right. No, this was great. Thank you so much. I'm glad I got to attend.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
And do you mind if I steal the screen share back from my final slide?
Not at all. Can you do it without me stopping?
I should be able to. Yep, looks like it. Go. So, well, the Michigan Council for Social Studies would like to thank you, Dr. Bobian, for agreeing to repeat this session tonight. And we'd like to thank everyone who is viewing this, both live and who will watch the recap later. But on behalf of our ever-growing MCSS board, you can see we only have 2 vacancies left, and I plan on filling both of them in the next couple of months here. On behalf of everyone listed on this slide, we wish all of you a great rest of your night and a continued successful school year. And Dr. Bobian, thank you again for doing this for us tonight. We really, really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.